Okay, people. Okay, people. Let's do this today. Yeah? I am not gonna lie. I have a wee bit. Hold on, I'm covering up that little. There's a timer there. If I look at it, it'll get in my head. I have a wee bit of a sore throat. Okay, might be a little sick. I don't think I'm gonna die. I don't think I'm gonna die from it. But if this one's shorter than normal or feels truncated in some way, let's just all blame that, right? It's not me being lazy. I do have a sore throat though. It's very annoying. Okay, today I didn't bring it. I didn't bring it. I have a Kindle Paperwhite. Just imagine it. It's beautiful. I already have my headphones on. I don't want to get up and go get it. So I have a book on I have a book on Kindle, so it's not a physical copy. I make that distinction for some reason. And it's part of a series. So this one is book 2 in the series. It's called The Conquering Tide by Ian W. Toll. Okay, it's a fantastic book. Fantastic. I think it only covers from 1942 to 1944. Just 2 years. It's a pretty hefty book. Now, I paid full price for this bad boy, right? So, I mean, I rarely do that. So, take that how you will. Um, I looked the author up because I was wanting something. I have a lot of general knowledge on the world wars and civil wars, this kind of thing. England, Spain. What I want now is more details. I want in depth. I want people to take their time. So I'm 3 books into Lyndon Johnson. You see? So I wanted one on history. That's what I'm looking at. And this one came up, and when I looked up the author, all he does is naval stuff, right? That's all he does. And he did 3. And this one, again, I saw this one was just a few years, 2 years of the war. So I'm like, I bet that's pretty in depth. So I just got it, right? Sight unseen. I didn't even read the first chapter really, which is what I normally do. And it's been a resounding success. I'm gonna buy the third one, and I'm gonna buy it not in Audible form because I have the thing where you get one Audible credit a month. I'm not gonna buy the Audible of this book, even though it'd be cheaper because there are graphs and pictures that come with this book, which I think make it easier to sort of know what's happening, to follow along, because who knows where these islands are, how things interacted. I like the pictures, so I'm gonna buy it the physical copy. Well, the Kindle copy. I'm not buying the physical one. Rating. I'm gonna give it a 3 out of 5. I think that if you're not into history big time, if you don't have that hankering, there's not as much, let's say, story here for the reader. There's not beautiful writing kind of situation. It is good writing. Don't get me wrong. He really paints the picture. You get the feeling like you're on these boats. You get an understanding of what's happening on these islands. But he's not really going. It's not waxing. It's not Shakespeare out here. He's not waxing poetic. You don't need to stop your day and read this unless you're into the source material. If you're into World War II, war in general, and not just like, oh, I'm big into war. It's more of a history for me, right? Because war is just these coalescent points in history. Before war, it's much more scattered. All the things come to a head in wartime, usually. So if you're into the history of it, you will not be disappointed. He gets some of it goes into minute by minute, right? Day by day, month by month. Very detailed. 100% worth the money, people. Mess up my notes. Okay. There's the war against Germany, and then there's the war against Japan. There's a lot I've read, or more I've read on German, less on the Japanese. So this one really focuses on the ships, and the ships were mostly right. It was mostly, I think, the British Navy in the Atlantic. Oh my God, what's in my eyeball? We sent a lot of boats to the Pacific, and it was a bigger problem than it sort of feels like in history when you're just getting the broad brushes. They really focus on Nazis, on Hitler, but the Japanese were a major problem. They were for real. They had more boats than us. They had more boats than us even after the Battle of Midway, right? And so we have to. He gives us a sense of the Navy itself. He says it's to them, to the people in the Navy, Neptune is God, Mahan prophet, and the United States Navy is the only true church. Right? They get this weird thing about themselves. I think like Patton went to a military institute in Virginia, other ones went to West Point, but he's like every naval officer for the past 100 years or some mess like this has gone through the Naval Academy. That's it. They all go through there. They all have this singular focus of learning from. They all get these singular points of view. And I think it has something to do with navies in general because I get some of the verbiage he uses is the same verbiage you can use for the British Navy, for the Russian one, for the Japanese Navy, the Germans. All navies get this sort of, I think it's something about being out on the water. You start thinking the same thoughts. You get this sort of idea in your mind, right? And it skews some of your perspective. Being in a Navy, I think it kind of messes with your head a little bit. Just being out on the water, right? Because they all have this idea about themselves, this grandiose idea. How, not that they're better than everyone, per se, but just that they're better than all the people, right? This is kind of how they think, where the things that they do matter more. But at some of it's, I think, the distance, right? Where if you send an army from this side of England to that, or from New York to Carolina for the Civil War, something like this, right? Some land-based situation. You go and then issues happen. You just send the guy back to tell him what's going to happen, and you just make a move, right? But you have that move you can make. When you send ships across the Atlantic or Pacific, it doesn't seem like anything's in your way, but a lot of stuff is. And the main thing is going to be distance, right? And even with radio or telegrams or whatever they had, I think in 1940s, I can tell you, okay, I changed my mind, go to this island instead of that, but it's not going to make my ship go any faster. It took months to get where I am. It's going to take days or weeks to adjust to there or there, and I can't get that time back. So if I go here, I'm literally not all these places, and other things will happen, right? It's like slow motion arrows. And you might be shot already, you just don't know it, right? It's this kind of situation. So they have to think in these abstract terms, right? They have to throw their mind ahead and see how the chips are going to fall and then act accordingly. So they're constantly in these long-term thinking ideas. Because the Pacific's huge, right? 600 miles, 900 miles, 1,000 miles. These are nothing. These are distances that are nothing to the Pacific. Islands that are close together still 20 miles apart. Water. If I send troops, I am the link to those troops, right? I'm their tether. Without me, they'll starve. All this sort of thing starts to happen. And so these are some of the problems you start to find in this book. What you also have is a hierarchy issue. And it's another thing that I noticed in this book as well as other histories. Personality becomes such a huge factor in these wars, any war. If MacArthur doesn't like Nimitz or something like this, there's an issue. In 1942 we didn't have a Department of Defense. We didn't have a Secretary of Defense. The Joint Chiefs was just cobbled together real quick to sort of hash it out with the other military people when Winston Churchill came over, right? Or when we decided to get into the war. And so without a structure, you have people like King, Marshall, MacArthur, Nimitz, who are given stuff, right? At the very top, it's which way do I want to go? This was a big issue. Winston and everyone wanted to beat Nazis first. King was very adamant that enough be sent to at least hold the Pacific, which requires a lot of stuff. 100,000 troops or more, maybe, right? 1,000 some odd planes, which they saw it as each plane sent there can't be used against the Germans, right? Now, once we're done, we see that it all worked out. But at the time, you don't know. Because Japan's so far away, and all they're taking is these little islands, and you don't think much of it. But the German issue's right here. And they're big and flashy, right? So we could have all focused on Japan, on Germany, and Japan could have had all this time to fortify, and then we might never have got the Pacific back. Could have gone the other way as well. We could have sent everything against Japan and got, bogged down completely, and then Hitler beats the Russians or they capitulate, and then it's just these two big factions with America in the center, right? So it was a tricky situation. And again, it's not that I don't have the dudes, it's time. 6 months to make this battleship, that much time to do that. 4 months to send a guy to this side of the world versus that side. In any case, we didn't have these things, so we have an Admiral King, again, very determined to help his side. Once he gets some of the stuff, because he could convince them that we need to defend it, he immediately wants to attack. He wants to move in. He doesn't want to just sit static. And that's another thing I've noticed. They were afraid to give MacArthur any more stuff. They say if we send it to MacArthur, he owns it, right? He'll do what he wants with it. Because I'm thousands of miles from Washington, D.C. This is an army that listens to me. I can do what I want. There's a large part he can do what he wants with the stuff that you've given him. This is the latitude we give these generals. So when they come to a plan, like a king wants us to take Guadalcanal or the Solomon Islands. Now we're arguing between MacArthur, these other generals, these admirals, how to do that. I think my ship should be here. The Marines are like, you can't move your ship there. I'll be left alone. Well, I'm not, and it's just these constant arguing, which I didn't, in my head, for some reason, American military doesn't argue with itself. But it's because I've never been in the military. I don't know. There's a lot of this in there. So much so, we land at Guadalcanal. The Marines get off. The stuff's just sitting there. And there's an argument as to you need to send more sailors to unload that stuff. And the Navy guy's like, I'm not sending my sailors. They got stuff to do. Get your Marines to do it. And he's like, I got to defend this whole island. I'm not moving half my guys off guns to unload boxes of tuna. Some of the food goes bad because no one unloaded it. On and on we go. There was an actual, comes down to meat and potatoes issue. Just on what needs to get moved, right? So you can imagine that amplifying out to battle plans, to where ships go, things like this. There was a task force. Now, a task force is a lot of ships, like an armada, but not. cruisers, destroyers, transporters, cargo ships, minesweepers, fleet oilers, aircraft carriers, right? So he describes all these ships coming up over the horizon, and it was, again, it reminds me of these other histories that I've read. Hold on. In these other histories I've read, there's one on the Armada, but I've read other ones too. Something about a people, a nation, seeing these big boats just inspires the people. Every time they can walk by and see these big ships being built or coming in over the horizon or whatever, like in this one, there's this surge. Like they're so awe-inspiring and incredible that soldiers and sailors can't be helped but moved by it. It's funny how consistent that is. I mean, I'm talking way back Sir Francis Drake, wooden boats. When they see them all lined up, they just have this feeling like I can do anything. This nation is unstoppable, right? And it happened here too. The Marines, the soldiers see all these ships coming and they're like, oh, it's going down now. Look at all this stuff. They feel impervious. They feel invincible. So they take that feeling to Guadalcanal. Before they get off, all these boats just like power blast this island, right? They just level the guns down and just shoot at this island, just hammer it. And then the Marines get off, nice and easy on the little boats. No problem, no one slipped, no issues. They roll right in and they hit the ground running. They've had all these stories about the invincible Japanese warrior. So they think they're going to hit the beach and it's just going to be this dogfight from beginning to end. Nothing happens. They get up, they mark their perimeters, start. Nothing happens. Nothing happens for days. Because in my mind, Guadalcanal was like D-Day, right? Where it's just tooth and nail. But it kind of wasn't. It was more like Vietnam. Guadalcanal turned into a quagmire. Here's what happened. So we land our troops. So we have 16,000 people, 16,000 Marines on that island. That's a lot of people to feed. You gotta bring it all, because these are jungle islands. So I'm having to bring stuff from California down to Australia, then up to the Solomon Islands. It's a long trip. Shoes, socks, cans of food, bullets, spare parts, toilet paper, wash medicine, all the things you can think of, soaps, candy, all the things you need to think, get it, build it, send it ahead of time, right? So now we have 16,000 men there who need to be able to shoot and kill other dudes. Their supplies are half here, half broke. More are going to get broke later because we don't have time to unload them. And these boats have to send more stuff constantly. All right, so now we have this point, this anchor point, and all this stuff tethered. They keep waiting for an attack. An attack doesn't come. What ends up happening is the Japanese have a small force. They were caught surprised. They didn't think anyone could roll up in there because of the coral reef, but we did. So they're caught off guard. They hide on the other parts of the island, and they start peppering. Late at night, they'll send snipers. They'll do this, they'll do that, throw grenades, this kind of thing. When you find them in a spot, you try and take them out, but they have tunnels. So you thought you got them, you didn't do anything. These literal, like, cement pillbox bunkers. They're just meant to just shoot out at an angle and then zip away, and then another, right? So they're peppering. As you're tied down there, you have all your ships. The Japanese then send a little strike force in to take out your boats. And they had been practicing nighttime. That was their idea. Their idea was to go in with night battleships. They had night vision, dudes with good eyesight. They snuck in. They snuck in at night and then jacked up some ships. In a 10-minute fight, I don't know, like 4 cruisers go down. People were getting blasted all over the place. Torpedoes were flying. Mass cannon fire, right? It's a full-on ship-to-ship battle. And the Japanese sort of won it. But we lucked out because they decide to regroup, to turn and leave, which, I mean, it ended up working out for us, but you can't really blame the guy because he doesn't really know what he's going into. And he had just as much chance to lose all of his ships, which again, take the 9 months to get new ones, on and on we go, training, crews, all this. You don't want to lose these ships. And he already got 4 or 5 of them. He's like, that's a job well done, let's back it out. And so now, what did they say? See, some of the Marines, they described it as, we were only pawns in a battle of the gods, and we knew it. Right? So you see these, they're just sitting on shore, and they can see all this out here. So now the apple cart's been upset, right? The Navy doesn't want to lose more boats, and the Marines can't leave their guys to die of starvation on this island. So we have to adjust, and we lose half of the island. So they can constantly replenish the island. The attacks continue. They lose some air support, so it's daily and nightly bombardment from Japanese planes. And this stretches into month after month. And as the numbers, 1,000 here, 500 here of soldiers, Japanese soldiers getting sent, then they'd flood in, pepper these attacks, and then every so often they'd do a banzai attack, which is just a suicidal charge, literally. They bum rush in, yelling banzai, and try and kill somebody. And of course you get cut down because they're machine guns, and that crap don't work. But this is when the Marines start to see the resolve of the Japanese. None of them were going to surrender. Even wounded, they would pretend to be hurt or dead, and when somebody came to check on them, they'd whip a gun out and shoot them, or they'd pull a grenade and blow everybody up. It was vicious. And even so much, right, where the people didn't think, because they'd been told all these stories about the Marines are these horrible savages that are just going to rape and pillage and burn. So a lot of families wouldn't even give themselves up. So it turned into just a constant drain. The supply line all the way from California, the Japanese sent submarines to harass the supply line. It just turned into a big drain holding this particular island, trying to fully win it over. Even with just this small pocket of Japanese on the island. Our boy Ian describes, and when I say describes, it's very well. He found the histories of a survivor from both sides, Japanese and a American, who were in a dogfight, right? Top Gun style. And then so he's able to describe to you both ends of this dogfight. And he does it for the whole war. I can describe the Japanese side from their records, our side from our records. And he'll time it, right? So you have this chapter of stuff that happened to the Americans. Then he'll instantly hit you with the Japanese, like, when we were unloading these ships, the Japanese were doing these things. And so it tethers it in your mind, right? So by the time you're done, it's like you have both of the stories in your mind at the same time, even though they didn't happen sort of to one character, if that makes sense, right? I have both sides of the story that are unconnected. They're separated by all this distance and culture. But I carry, because the stories of the war, they were both affected by the war, actions in the war, right? So I can carry the war story from these two different points of view at the same time. It's really smart how he did it. When he describes these ship battles, because he constantly uses, they all have a name. The Saratoga, the Kentucky, whatever, the Hornet, the Wasp. They all have these names. And for whatever reason, I feel like you start to be attached to the ships, right? And so in that sense, you feel the danger the same as their captains or their admirals feel the danger. You don't want these ships lost. One, there are these nice ships in your mind. Two, there are all these people on the ship. And three, it could affect the war and all this sort of thing. So you don't want these ships lost. So when they get in a fight, right? And you're like, the Wasp took two shots to the bow here, and then these gunners got blown up, and she starts turning this way and trying to avoid that torpedo, and eventually gets caught and bombarded and black. You know what I mean? So you start to feel like a character got shot, a character's dying, and then fighting back, valiantly because they constantly shoot back. You feel like when people can get off the boat, right? He says abandon ship, and 30 minutes later it sinks. You feel like the boat hung on so that more people could get off before it succumbed to its wounds or something, right? You get this weird sense about these ships. And it's not biased towards the Americans, right? You get the same sense, I think, from the Japanese ships. A little different because they're Japanese and they have their mentality, but you do get this sense. You don't like these ships to go down, and it's interesting as you read that this feeling comes out of you. Again, a testament to my boy's writing here. But we end up, I think, 4 or 5 of these battles. Highly descriptive, right? Highly descriptive of ship to ship, of carrier to carrier, of tracking, of the hunt, of you surprised them here, they snuck away there, you caught up with them here, this kind of thing. So it's very detailed. I like it. I really do like it. And again, if you like war, you're not going to be disappointed by this book. Um, Guadalcanal just keeps getting from bad to worse. You end up staying there long enough that malaria and dysentery start affecting you, right? There's no clean water. There's all these stupid mosquitoes. And also, the same morale boost that those ships gave you, when they get power blasted in the harbor, all the Marines are just sitting on the shore, and you can't help but see the massive explosions, right? And when you wake up and there's these burning husks of ships that were once these glorious things, the morale starts to degrade against these Marines, right? You're just stuck on this dumb island. You can never get a good night's sleep. You can get sniped at any point. There's this constant grind on, well, on both sides, but the Japanese, their culture, like, submits to it almost. Like, the Japanese soldier almost knows in his mind, I'm going to die on this island. He just brushes that off. He accepts it. It's to them, it's almost like honorable to die. This Bushido way kind of situation. So the fact that it's this grindy, horrid, starvation, malaria-fueled fight doesn't affect them whatsoever. If anything, they're like, the worse it gets, the more honor I have. So from their half, they're not as affected. We got volunteers. We got kids who got drafted. He was living in Kentucky. He was living in California, wherever. Now he's on this stupid island, and the heat's constant because it's a jungle. And there's no relenting on the enemy. And all the ships got blown up, right? So the morale just starts to sink. And then later, they'll start to hear how Navy guys getting medals because of the battles won and fought. And then it gets them more sour, right? Like, I'm out here stinking in this heat and dying, pooping everywhere, and you're the one getting a medal because you sat on a boat, right? So you start to see where the inner agency fractions arise from, and that they don't go away. The Japanese Navy versus their army, same issues. There's this constant infighting between these two military factions. Again, mad credit to the Japanese pilots. Ours didn't have long trips because they just had to defend an island. The staging ground, because they didn't have any carriers, for the Japanese pilots was 500 miles away. It's 500 miles in, 500 miles back. And any dogfighting you do in between. That's a long trip. Hours upon hours upon hours. And the way the Japanese did it was the same as they did the other stuff. They had highly trained pilots, probably better than ours. Definitely a better plane. But they would grind them into the dust, essentially. Because the way they see it, you're the pilot, go do pilot stuff. And you're not supposed to complain, so none of them did. And if they did, they would have been seen as shameful cowards or whatever. So they sent him out on mission after mission. Sent him out on mission after mission. One guy ended up, he survived somehow. 84 kills in a plane, in plane-to-plane fighting. That's kind of nuts. Another guy had 60 something. And without rest, without breaks, some of them would start to crack. Ours would start to crack, but we gave them plenty of breaks in between. We wouldn't let them fly too many missions back to back, this kind of thing. We understood. We didn't want to. We could lose the planes. We couldn't lose the pilots. And our culture didn't want to lose them anyway, versus their culture who's like, well, if you die, you die. Right? So it was like a double clash there. In any case, after day, month, week after week of this, month maybe, some of the pilots would sort of lose their minds. The one pilot, they would say that you'd see a Japanese Zero and he'd start just doing all kind of acrobatics in front of you. And the Americans took it like, he's trying to impress me with this skill. I think he just kind of cracked, right? Every day is a life or death mission, and you're in this plane, and you're by yourself, and I think at some point you just crack. And you go loopy. I think that's what happened to some of these. This is my opinion now. Our author didn't say this. One of them got up right on close and then just did a barrel roll around the guy. Instead of shooting him, when he could have shot him, he just sort of rolled around him. And then he, shot him down. The Americans shot him down because it's an enemy. That's what you do. But I think some of them started to crack. It's kind of wild. And again, to talk about the culture difference. And I think it matters. And that's why he put it in his book, because it does matter. It's a major deal. They had massive propaganda back home saying, they didn't describe a single loss on the news whatsoever. We described every loss. We had immediate political ramifications at Pearl Harbor, immediate ramifications after the loss in the harbor of Guadalcanal, right? We just instantly took it right to the chin. But FDR was able to manage it. Our politics allow that. Their politics didn't allow it. You don't say something to someone's face to embarrass them. You don't cause waves. This kind of thing. That's the Japanese way. And so none of the battles were said to be losses. But at some point, wounded started coming back home. And they'd whisper, right? It's not going our way. We're losing horribly. And then the people back home were like, well, I can't tell the neighbor. That'll just be negative. And so everyone kind of knew the battle was going south. And then collectively, no one said anything. And collectively, they all just started in their mind to accept the fact that this horrible army, this horrible Mongol army of Americans might eventually come to Japan. And they started prepping their mind for that. And it was like a weird fanaticism. People who lived through it were like, that's how they describe it. They're like, it's very strange to think back that we were all willing to accept this level collectively. No one spoke out against it, not really. Anyone who did sort of got hushed up quick or arrested. But even they weren't many. They all sort of accepted this outcome. You did start a war and you lost, and you're going to eat it. And I bring that up because it affected our style. Americans, we're not about everyone just eating it. What is it? We're no man left behind kind of thing. So when our generals eventually get a hold of Guadalcanal, we saw the toll that it took. We took out of our minds what we had planned. We had planned to go at each island they took, beat them off of it, and win the war. We're like, F that. We're not fighting these guys on every island. It's going to take too much time, too many dudes, too much money. It's stupid. We start island hopping, obviously. Grand historical knowledge there. And we start skipping, right? This is what a lot of what happened in these 2 years affects that, where we start to skip. Because these 2 years were just bloody knife fights, just hand to hand. We're not going to give up we clearly have won, but they're not going to quit. They're going to die to the last man, and that's extremely costly, right? It's one thing. What is it? Like genocide is sort of easy if they don't have guns. Try a genocide when they have guns, and they're all going to try and fight you to the death. And it's a hard situation. So these 2 years informed us a lot and really affected the outcome of the whole war. It's why the nukes had to drop on Japan. This is not in the book, but I just remember it. One general in Japan, one admiral, I think, was like daydreaming about how glorious it'd be. This one beautiful death bloom for Japan before it was exited out of existence, because they were imagining American soldiers by the million, by hundreds of thousands invading, just this sweep of an army killing everyone, and in their mind, every Japanese person taking out an American before he goes down, right? And so that in the end, there's no Japanese on Earth, and that we went down just as hard as can be. They were kind of nuts, and some of it because you don't want to be negative, you want to be positive. I can't say that's a bad idea. And so when someone suggests, maybe the citizens can fight, instead of being negative to that, I add to it with positivity, right? And so if the room's constantly positive about ideas, you end up with this big ballooned idea of this grandiose death. It's a weird positive reinforcement situation. It's very weird. It's very Japanese. And this is the reality of the 1940s, right? So there's propaganda, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter if they got news reports from America anyway. They wouldn't have believed, and even if they'd have believed, they wouldn't have acted different. It's a very strange situation when it comes to this war. Another sort of strange thing, Yamamoto. He's their big admiral. And the man, what they say, almost lived like a dandy is what they call it, where he's just super fancy all the time. All his crap's always pressed. He lives on a big battleship that doesn't go fight. He eats the fanciest food. He's like lays around all day writing letters to friends or playing chess or shogi with people. Anytime you see him, he's immaculately dressed, pressed, clean, a little chunky, but on purpose. Even when he's working, like we got to make this battle plan, he's talking about other side stuff. And that was a Japanese thing as well. When you're the big crap in charge, you're supposed to be that way, right? So even if he didn't want to, he played the part perfectly, which was weird to me, right? We see our main commanders as farm boys. Nimitz just came from Texas. He's just a Texas boy. And none of them want power. And at any point, they could all go back to the Texas farm or the Iowa cornfields, which a lot of them do. After the war, a lot of these admirals just go back. I just go live on a ranch somewhere. It's a very peculiar, this dichotomy between how our generals are, our admirals versus theirs. Not saying there's not power hungry in between, but there's these big, broad brushstrokes of differences that is fascinating. I think in the course of this book, you do get to feel like you know Yamamoto, you know Nimitz, you know Admiral King and Marshall, right? Somehow between these interactions where even when the author's not spending too much time sort of in storytelling elements of them, it's just so much action that you can't help but glean information about their person from their actions, right? It's this kind of thing. Okay, I don't know how long that was. My throat is dying though. So I'm sort of going to stop there. That's the main broad stroke of this book. It is a fantastic book. It's not a history book is just that. It's just history. So it's more than history. I'm not saying there's not a lot of Shakespeare to him, but he does write you a story. He brings it to life, right? So it's a very good story there. And again, we get detailed on as many battles as he could find out about. from both sides. And if that sounds like your cup of tea, I'd 100% give this a go. It was my cup of tea. You know what? Even if it's not your cup of tea, if you like to read, keep this in the back of your mind because at some point your taste may change. You'll grab, you'll see something, you'll grab something, and you'll be like, you know what? That sparked an interest. If you get an interest sparked, this sort of thing, remember, come back to it. And this sort of thing can really feed your interests. Okay, ad time is obviously going to be short because I want to go and not be talking. Ah, I should have one of these in the queue, right? In case I get sick or something, but I'm not going to do it. I'm going to do it live, bro. This is what happened this week. I covered this book this week. I am worried about these big fat books and not getting them done in time. There may come a week, people. There may come a week when I just come up here and I shake my head and I say I couldn't do it. And I don't know what I'm going to do. Do I just cover half the book? I don't know. I might just cover half the book. Nah, I might just skip a week. I don't know. It's a hard decision. I don't know what to do. Maybe I'll cover half the book so I can keep the content churning. I don't know. If I do half, maybe I'll do 2 videos that week and finish it off. I don't know. In any case, that's the ads. There's a new Amazon author page. That's these new pictures are of the new Amazon author page. I think they sort my books out much better than the old one. So go check it out. Buy one if you're interested. If you want to help the channel, however it is. You don't have to. Content's still going to be free. Will be and always will be free. Me blabbing about these books. Okay, people. Thank you. Hopefully my throat doesn't hurt by next week.